Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Writing Podcast. I'm your host Adam, and as always, I'm here with my co-host Lindsay. And unlike the last 2 weeks, we're back to doing interviews, and like we mentioned, we'd be going back to that and trying to mainly do that because I think Lindsay and I would eventually run out of stuff to say, especially about craft things. So Lindsay has invited one of her co-hosts from the podcast that she cheats on us with, but they have like doubled episodes now, so I'm not sure if it's the other way around or not, but. Joseph Lallo is on the show. So, Joseph, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. And you probably said this to everyone that's watched the other show, but I know a lot of people listening watch all the podcasts or listen to all the podcasts, but there's probably some in here that haven't seen the other ones. So, can you explain to everyone who you are? Give us a little brief introduction to you and your self-publishing so far.
Sure. I'm Joseph Lallo. I'm the author of my main series is the Book of Deacon, which is self-published. That's a fantasy story, epic fantasy. I've also written a sci-fi series called Big Sigma. I've got a steampunk series called Free Wrench, and some assorted other stuff, which is really not really worthy of note. And I co-host the science fiction and fantasy marketing podcast with Lindsay and Jeff Poole.
All right, awesome. And when did you first get started? We every time we ask someone when they got started writing, it's always like, oh, back when I was in the womb, I started putting out ideas. But when did you get started with self-publishing?
I got started with self-publishing at the beginning, like January 2010. Like I had written my stuff, as you say, but after the standard query letters that didn't really land, my friends convinced me to do self-publishing back in the days before it was KDP, back when it was DTP, Digital Text Platform, and I did Amazon and Smashwords back then, and I didn't really start making money until about 2011 when I did my first perma-free, but since then it's been my primary income, and then since a little over a year ago it's been my only income because I'm now officially an author because that's how I pay my bills.
Awesome. So you started way back in the gold rush days, as people say now. Like, oh, I wish I would have started way back then. It's only like 4 or 5 years ago. But
Pretty much. That's it. I started in the days when if you made your book free, blogs would pick it up because they could make a lot of money off of free books back then. So my first, like, what made me all my money was when I went free. Or made me all my money. Made me all my notoriety. I went free, and then Pixel of Ink picked it up, and I got 25,000 downloads in a day. Like, that's like back then you didn't even have to advertise to get that if you went free. So yeah, it was a different landscape back then.
yeah, for sure. And for anyone that doesn't know, a couple of years ago, I think it's been now, the affiliate program on Amazon was changed. Used to, if sites put up free books with an affiliate link, they would get income off that where people would go and buy other things or even buy the sequels after clicking on that free book. And they changed it a while back that I don't remember the exact wording of it, but pretty much and anyone that's tried using promo places will know, well, if you started before that period, that they changed it where they don't do as many free books or it's more expensive because they don't get as much off of it. So
I think the way it works now, it used to be anything that somebody bought within 24 hours of clicking through was you'd still make your affiliate, and then they changed the rules so that if more than 80% of your affiliate money comes from free links, you don't get paid at all. Not only do you not get paid for the free links, you don't get paid for what you got through normal links. So people de-emphasize free pretty quickly.
right, yeah, I remember that. And I didn't remember exactly, but yeah, it sounds pretty crazy. And I remember BookBub and all of them, are talking about their changes in pricing because of that and stuff. So.
Yep.
All right, so back to the books themselves. So you write sci-fi and fantasy predominantly. Which one of those did you start off with, and did you, stick to that one until you got the series out, or how did the early writing and releases look like?
I started with fantasy, and I had written what turned out to be my trilogy, which is still the biggest moneymaker. I wrote that all as one big, like, 500,000-word monstrosity, and then I chopped it up. So I technically had 3 books to start off. So I didn't publish my first book until I had 3 books, and then they were trickled out over the course of about a year and a half. And while those were failing to sell in the early days, at first I tried. I did another fantasy that was shorter because I thought maybe people didn't want to read long books. Not not imagining that maybe people just hadn't found me yet. And then when that didn't do anything, I started writing sci-fi just because maybe people don't want to read fantasy books. And just as I was finishing my first sci-fi and starting my second, people discovered my fantasy, and then I was basically, I got to hurry up and finish this sci-fi and write some more fantasy. And then I've been chasing my own tail ever since. But yeah, it was fantasy first, and then sci-fi just to cover all bases, and because my friends told me to. Almost every decision I've made in the book biz has been because my friends told me to.
That's always smart business planning. So it's good though that you went with, I guess, sci-fi, because Lindsay and I were talking last week too a little bit that sci-fi and fantasy fans will kind of cross-pollinate a little bit more than maybe some other genres that are a lot more strict about, going to other genre even within the same author's catalog. So, and we talked a little bit about kind of subgenre set in there that they may not be as open to going towards. Like, of course, she was talking about because of her sci-fi romancy type stuff that's a little bit different. But are your sci-fi and your fantasy kind of otherworld type settings? Is that so that you kind of get those same people that want a whole different experience off Earth sort of thing?
They're yeah, more or less. The fantasy is very very second world or whatever. It takes place in a so far not named on the page, but a world that is certainly not our own. And the sci-fi takes place distant future. It's established at this point in this book, because this book has a lot of date talk in it. It's about 400 years in the future, so there has not yet been a scene that takes place on Earth. So yeah, it's not, the at least the sci-fi one is supposed to be our future, like 400 years from now, but within our universe, the fantasy is entirely standalone.
Okay. And so even with that, do you see a lot of crossover? Do you definitely have groups of your audience that will not read the other genre?
I haven't really had a lot of people. I've had people who will be upset that I'm writing another sci-fi because they prefer my fantasy. So I suppose they might not be crossover people, but for the most part, particularly fans I hear the most from, people will follow me between genres. I find apparently, and this is even before I wrote any sci-fi, I was told that my fantasy writing is good for sci-fi readers. Like, I give a very, I want to say, analytical approach to magic in the first book, and people are just like, oh, this like really hammers it down. Not like it's just, it's not like magic. It's like a science that they understand that we don't. So I think that probably helped a little bit. I have a similar approach to both, and therefore people with a taste for either can sort of find something they want in the other.
All right, awesome, man. So I think Lindsay has some questions about this, so I don't want to go into all of it and take all of her questions that we've planned out, but that kind of leads me to ask you, what do you see the main difference in writing sci-fi and fantasy? Maybe for someone watching that writes one and kind of wants to step into the other, do you get into a different mindset with those? I mean, obviously the tropes are going to be a little bit different, but as far as how you do the writing, how the writing goes, planning, all of that.
My opinion on it, broadly speaking, you can sort of interchange sci-fi and fantasy writing. I said that basically if you swap out like the ocean for space and spaceships for dragons, you more or less can switch one to the other with just like a global replace and a word processor. My opinion on it usually is you're going to do a lot more research for sci-fi the way I write it, because you only want it to be fiction for the things we don't have yet. Everything else, sci-fi writers are going to be a lot more sticklers for if there is physics that exists, unless you specifically say something has changed those physics in this setting, they're not going to buy it happening differently. In a fantasy setting, you can make stuff up whole cloth because, well, who knows what sort of a world this is. But I will not get emails for getting dragons wrong nearly as often as I'll get emails for getting jetpacks wrong. And I have gotten emails on both of them. But apparently I really screwed up the way rockets work in the first sci-fi thing. So as a rule, you're going to be a little bit closer to reality in sci-fi. And then fantasy, you can play a little bit faster and looser. I also find that sci-fi, I don't like going grimdark with any of my stuff, but I find that because the way I write sci-fi, it's got a cultural context. It's still our world, so I can sort of refer to things that exist now if I want to. I can throw some inside jokes and gags in, so it's more amenable to humor the way I write it. But yeah, the main difference between the two is just one of them has to be rooted in reality with a divergent point where the fiction comes in, and fantasy does not have to be rooted in reality at all.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I wouldn't say one is probably harder than the other because I mean, like making up a magic system that's not based off something else. I mean, that's one of those really challenging things I think because I've thought about things like that. I don't usually write fantasy, but when I was in high school and stuff, that's the kind of stuff I gravitated towards and what I read a lot of. So I'll kind of verge off into that. So with the magic in your world, did you come up with those kind of scientific, as you said, magic systems, or did that derive from something else, or how did you come up with that?
What I sort of came up with it the same way. It's fairly scientific. I mean, I'm not throwing out like units of measure or anything like that. But what I tried to do was I feel like the most important thing to making something believable is making it consistent. So I wanted to make sure that there were rules that were laid out, and there's a big portion of the first book where they're basically the main character is learning the system, so it's being fairly well spelled out to her in ways that the reader can understand it too. So I tried to like hammer out like the actual techniques involved, and just so that every piece of it sort of I tried to make it make sense. I didn't do any research beforehand to see if this was similar to or different from the way other people's magic systems were. This was just a situation where I asked myself, well, if this was going to happen, how would it work? And then tried to just nail that all down, and shape it into the things I needed it to be later.
That makes sense. And did you kind of develop these things as you went through your writing? Last week we talked a lot about uh, characters and planning characters even before you put them in the story. Did you develop the system before you put it in the story, or is that something you kind of did as you went, or a little of both?
It was a little of both. I had sort of thumbnails on like how the magic, particularly how the education of the magic was structured. Like there are going to be more or less to plan out what characters I was going to need to do the education. But so I knew that there was going to be divided into these different types of disciplines. And then as I started to write it out is when I got into the specifics of how each of those disciplines works and how they differ from one another. So I knew the basic structure beforehand, but I filled in a lot of the specifics as I went.
All right. And lately, people have been talking a lot about sort of rules to writing and, of course, genre specific. One of the things that's happened in the last couple of years, especially anyone watching that writes in fantasy or reads a lot of fantasy will know, is, and it kind of maybe sprung up or got popular with the Game of Thrones books, is magic. It's kind of in the background in fantasy. And it sounds like yours, doesn't go with that trend. I haven't read yours. Sorry about that. But
No
and
problem.
so is that the truth with yours? Have you put magic sort of in the background, or is it at the forefront? And how do you feel about that as the current in the current genre? Which way do you go? Write what you want, or
Yeah, I always write what I want. And this is like well, not a secret shame, it's a public shame, but I have not been doing an awful lot of writing since I started, a lot of reading once I started writing because I'm terrified of accidentally plagiarizing. So I can't keep tabs on modern, trends because I don't know what they are. The most recent books I'm reading are all from 10, 15 years ago. But it's fairly in the foreground, I guess. I mean, it starts off in the background because no one who are following knows how to use it. But by the middle of the first book, when a lot of education is going on, from that point forward, it becomes very much a tool of the trade for our main characters. And it's not like magic runs the world, but by the third book, most of the characters that we follow either has a working knowledge of magic or has developed non-magical workarounds in order to do those things. So it's as much a part of the world as like technology is for sci-fi. So it's fairly forefront when I write.
okay, that makes sense. And for anyone watching that writes fantasy and may be trying to stick towards those unwritten rules, or I guess they're probably written somewhere by now about like current trends and stuff, that you don't have to go with those things to be successful, or especially to make a living off writing. I mean, you've obviously done that, and magic's at the forefront of your series. So, and you're talking about reading from 10 or 15 years back. They say all that stuff is coming back around, so maybe you are doing
Yeah,
research of what's about to get hot again. So
I'm gonna be accidentally at the forefront of the second cycle.
that's right. So you're starting to wear bell bottoms and stuff like that too for that. Programs.
Well, I'm getting a big bushy beard. That's part of it.
That's right. So, and so that kind of leads me to another one of these writing rules, and I guess you said that the character finds out a lot about magic all at once. So another one of these rules, and this one's an old one, is not to do info dumps, where you said there wasn't much magic, and then all of a sudden it comes into the story. So how do you handle that without doing that huge info dump? Like, this is magic, this is the system, this is how it works. How do you sprinkle it into the story that works, or do you do one of those info dumps?
I don't. Well, info dumps occur. Let's put it that way. In general, my stuff is very long, so it particularly was for example in the example of magic. It takes about the entire second half of the first book in order to educate the character. So rather than one giant info dump, here's how it all works, which I guess is like the writing equivalent of a montage. Mine's sprinkled out throughout the second half of the first book, so there's 75,000 words is filling this stuff in. So that's how I avoid info dumps in general, is just by spreading it out thin over a much longer book. But the sci-fi, which tends to be a little bit shorter in the beginning, I will do an info dump just because the main character in my sci-fi he's not technical. He does not fully understand the operating principles of this sci-fi stuff. So he there will be an aside where he will sort of halfway explain something just because he didn't quite understand it. So glossing over is one of the ways. Is giving the bare minimum necessary to understand is one way I avoid info dumps. But other times I'll just take an aside, and not so much dump like 5 pages of information, but like a character will reference something, and I'll have to do a 2-paragraph sort of mini info dump, sometimes framed as somebody reminiscing on it. Info dumps is something I dance all around, but I've been told that I use them a bit more than I ought to.
All right. And so before I kind of run out of my portion of the show here, one thing I wanted to kind of switch gears to is, as I understand it, you've at least written, one prequel to some of your series. So is that true, just one prequel, or how many of your series have prequels now?
I would say probably it's fair to say only one like full novel is a prequel. I've had a few other things that sort of take place as in-betweens, but just my fantasy series and just one full-length prequel.
Okay, and so was that prequel something you had always planned to do, or that's part of the story you had in mind and didn't get into the first book, or is that something you just did later on?
After I finished my third book, or really my fourth book in the fantasy series, I started to get a following. So I wanted to give people more about individual characters, and I asked them which character they would be most interested in learning more about. And the character they chose, a sequel focusing on that character wouldn't make a lot of sense. So I ended up doing a prequel, and if you write a character deeply enough, then you know what their back story is, and he had an interesting one. So that's sort of where my prequel came from. It wasn't planned from the beginning, but it was a part of the planning process for the trilogy. So that's where that one worked. That's how it fit in.
Okay, and did you write it keeping in mind that new readers to you may actually read that if they find like a chronological list somewhere? Did you keep that in mind and try not to spoil later things, or how did you go about that process?
It's a little like it can be read as a standalone, but if you read it as a standalone, you will learn some things that there will be some spoiler content. But likewise, if you read the trilogy first and then read this, you're going to have a little bit of spoiler content. So rather than trying to make them completely isolated and you can read both cold without just spoiling the other, I sort of had a mutual system where no matter where you start, you'll have an interesting story, but you're going to have some information that the characters of that story didn't have beforehand. So I could have worked a little bit harder, but I really think it's hard to write a prequel without spoiling, because essentially when you write a prequel, you have the end predetermined by what was out already. I've had people start with the trilogy, and I've had people start chronologically with the prequel, and neither of them seemed terribly upset that they read them in the order they read them in. But overall, people like to read in the order in which I wrote them, as opposed to the order in which they take place, and that's probably the better way to go.
All right, so for people that are kind of scared about spoiling later things, for instance, we've written lots of spin-off series, and they take place in different times, and we found out, there's no way that you can do a whole series or a long book that's a prequel or whatnot, and not talk about some of the events that are going to happen. They're going to know where the character is going to end up. So it sounds like your advice would just be, don't be scared to write it, even if it has spoilers in either end, right? So.
Yeah, that's my opinion. Is it's like you don't want to be have conspicuous blank spots in the story that would have otherwise been interesting because you were trying to avoid revealing something later on. This is a character who's fairly mysterious, so if you know where he actually came from, it's going to spoil a little bit when he first shows up and does not appear to be that way. Uh, so yeah, I mean, it's nice to try to make it clean so that nobody, people can read through and not have to worry about stepping on their own toes. But if it's at the expense of making the story interesting, then I don't think it's worth doing.
Right. And kind of going off that into the marketing side of it, because obviously we have a mixed group that watch and kind of interested in both, just like we all are. How do you go about pricing the prequels? Did you price it so that it could be a lead-in to your trilogy, or did you just price it, the same as your trilogy novels, or how did you go about that?
I didn't price it special to be a lead-in. Like, I will occasionally do a separate promotion on it so that it can be a lead-in. But generally speaking, it's priced the same as my other novels in the trilogy, my other full-length novels. It's now a little bit cheaper because as time has gone on, I've started to raise the prices on the newer stuff. So technically, it's priced as an entry level just because it's cheaper than the last two books that I released. But I more or less am still using the first book of the trilogy as my primary funnel into everything else. Uh, Eventually, that might change. It depends on if I write. Like, there are now gaps. There's room between the end of the prequel and the beginning of the trilogy. So if I start sort of a parallel storyline, I might essentially treat the trilogy as like a second entry point and price it accordingly.
Yeah, I think it makes sense from like a promotional standpoint. Certain places won't take the same book, more than like once every 6 months. Some of them now, and so if you're gonna be writing more in that series or that world universe to appease your fans, to sell more books to your already existing fans, it makes sense to make them be able to be lead-ins to the series, so that you can submit those in between those gaps in promotions. So.
Yeah, it's definitely a good way to go, and like really, like I had said in another podcast at one point, like if you are writing in the same, it's hard to have the fourth book in a series be a breakout novel. But if you can take your series and break it into eras or in some other way have threads that have separate beginnings, it's definitely useful. So I'm leaning in that direction, but I haven't quite got that whole plan in motion yet.
Yeah, I'm a strong believer in that now too. We wrote our original series and then went to a whole different series, different world. I mean, still Earth, but a different story universe, and it wasn't doing as well, and people wanted more from the old. So now we're up to almost finishing our third spin-off series of that in that world, and it's you can get new readers to each individual series in that world, and you can cross promote it very easily, and then you kind of appease your older fans too. They're just looking for more of that same stuff. So. I think it's a
Yeah.
smart idea for sure. If there's anywhere that you can spin it off, why not try it? So.
Yeah, and it's funny. I talk about how like I can't do trends because I don't read stuff recently. The last really big chunk of books I read was the Discworld series from beginning to end, almost without stopping. And he does the same thing where he's sort of like there's very few direct sequels, but he has sort of three or four story threads, and you can carry this, follow the Sam Vine's stories, or you can follow the Witch's stories. And if you want, you can read everything, or you can just do each individual thread and they will eventually cross each other and you sort of get introduced to other characters. So it's like a very intelligently done thing. And again, that's there was one fairly recent one, but like most of these are dating back into the 90s, the earliest, latest or whatever.
Yeah, I've read some, not all. I think my wife's read them, and if I recall her talking about some of it too. Like chronologically, it's all really weird too. It's like write a prequel that's way before the next book, and it's just dotted all around. So, but people
Yeah,
like it obviously. So.
he dances all over the place. It's impressive how much time elapses. It, yeah, it's he does it in a very interesting way, and I can't say that I've tried to emulate it, but I've seen how I can maybe try to use some of those tactics for my own purposes.
Right. All right. I think that's all I had for now. I'll go ahead and pass it over to Lindsay. She has some questions for you, and then if we have time left, if there's any comments or questions from viewers, we'll get to those too. So, Lindsay.
All right, I get to talk. I'm over here in my dark cave that's poorly lit, so I'm excited now. All right, one thing I wanted to ask actually while I was just thinking when Adam was talking, and Joe, it sounds like you wrote like maybe 4 books before anything kind of took off and started selling.
Yep.
I think a lot of people now, they get started and they get really upset and frustrated if they don't sort of see success right away in the first book or two. How did you stay motivated, and what made you want to keep on publishing?
Well, part of it is just when I feel like if I have done something, if I've done the work, I sort of have to make it pay. It's every one of the hobbies that I've had, I've eventually tried to turn it into something because then I can just justify doing it more. So I was already writing. Again, I had written the trilogy I had written in its entirety before I tried publishing any of it. And I was going to continue writing in my spare time anyway, and if I'm going to continue writing, I might as well continue publishing. The only thing that changed was once I started publishing, I started caring about what people may or may not want to read, and that sculpted what I would write next. But broadly speaking, one would hope you're writing because you like writing. So you shouldn't need motivation to continue writing, just maybe to continue trying to make a business of it. And if that's the problem, then you don't really have to worry too much about it because these books are not going to go off the shelf. They have every single day is a new chance for any of the books to catch on. So don't worry if it's not selling well. If you're not trying to pay your bills with it, then it shouldn't concern you if your books are selling well, if you enjoy writing. And if you are trying to make a business of it, then even so, you're not going to do, motivation to write should not be a problem for you unless you are not particularly interested in writing. Yeah, so I mean, I was down that I wasn't selling many books, but actually, it's more fair to say I was up every time I sold a book. You know, like there was literally a time when I would sell a book once every 2 months, and I would call everyone I know to ask them if they were the one who bought it, just in case, so that I could. Should I feel legitimately happy right now, or did you guys buy this and not tell me? So set your expectations low in the beginning, I guess, is a good way to stay motivated.
All right, guys, you heard it. The secret is low
Low
expectations.
expectations. That way, it can only go up.
All right. Did you do anything that kind of spurred things on? I don't remember if you ever have gotten new covers, or I think you mentioned once before that you redid the editing or something like that at some point.
I did all of those things, and I did them all separately. First, the books were entirely edited by me, and I made my own covers. And that was not the best decision I've made. It turns out I'm not great at making covers, and I'm even worse at editing. But when I made my first book free, when I made my first book free, I made about $3,000 in the following 2 months, and then it started to taper off basically to nothing again. So I took the $3,000 I made and I bought all new covers. I didn't spend all of it on that, but basically I dumped in about $800 per cover to do all new covers, and instantly my sales tripled, and they started to consistently rise for a while because I had a really sharp looking cover. And then I started getting a lot of reviews, and my reviews were numerous, but they were trending toward the mid 3 out of 5 range because it was poorly edited. So once I had enough money earned, I rolled that in to improve the editing, and my star average went up by 1 full star. So, you know, I discovered independently a good cover is super important and good editing is super important. And you can turn a book around by changing either or both of those things if you do so. So it's fair to say the free book and then the updated covers are the reason I was able to eventually quit my job. That was the two-pronged attack that gave me a foothold.
Definitely. And to new writers or new publishers listening, we should remind folks that back in 2010, it was not easy to find a cover artist.
No.
It wasn't easy. There was nowhere to advertise. There was
Yeah.
I remember Kindle Nation Daily was like the one place, and you could buy ads on Goodreads. That was it in like late 2010.
It was easier to again, if you went free, it was easier for a free book to pay for it, to get noticed because it was so rare, but it was also very hard. Nothing was geared toward. There was no support industry around self-publishing really. So when I had to find an artist, I didn't search for a cover artist. I searched for epic fantasy art and then tried to find someone I thought could make a good cover. So I went on, DeviantArt and found my guy. And yeah, it was a little bit harder back then to do anything remotely indie author marketing focused.
All right, so it's like I think some people may look back on that as it was the golden age. If you got in early, it was easy. There's a lot of things that are
Yeah.
today. I see people start out with these gorgeous covers, and everything's perfect because they listen to the podcast and
Yeah.
they know what
That's
to do.
that's the other thing is it's so early on there weren't a lot of mistakes being made by other people yet because not a lot of people were doing things, so you had to make every mistake yourself and learn from your own mistakes. So there was always a conga line of stupid things you did, which now you can just go to, do a search and you'll find a checklist of all the things that I learned over the first 2 years you can do in the first 15 minutes of research. So it's a good time to start in that regard. It's a good time to start then because it was a less crowded market.
All right, and I'm curious, as someone who has, I guess you have like 3 series going. Does that sound right? And some
Three series
standalones.
are worth continuing. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, as that's some of the advice that's out there now. Of course, is do a series. That's what pays. Just kind of looking on from the outside, it looks like you kind of have your Book of Deacon trilogy, and the spin-off books are like kind of your star series, and the others like maybe they're doing fine too, but not as, I don't know, not
Yeah.
as many sold, not as many reviews, that kind of thing. Have you learned anything about series that, like, if you were starting again now, that you would apply based on your experiences?
Yeah. Well, first off, always write a series, and I've learned that you want to spend a lot of time making sure you've got interesting characters. Ideally, you'd have interesting main character, although my main characters tend to be the weakest of my characters because they have to drive the plot. But you want to have interesting characters because those are the things that people are coming back to see. You can finish an entire arc, you can finish an entire plot, but if your characters are interesting enough, people will want to read more even though the story is told. So I feel as though I did reasonably well with that, but focusing a lot on setting and characters first and making sure those are hashed out, and then plot can come later. In terms of planning, I mean, in terms of writing, you're going to obviously want to have a good plot in your first book. And other than that, it's tricky. Again, I have more than one series, and I really don't know if that was the best decision because the more you can focus on doing new books in a series that's successful, obviously the more successful you'll be. And I write long enough books, and I'm a slow enough writer that it's kind of hard to build momentum on any series if I keep bouncing back and forth. And if I don't keep bouncing back and forth, fans of the series that's being neglected will start to drop off even faster. So I would say don't go overboard with series unless you have the speed to back it up.
Or you become like me and you start all these series and then you keep writing the books in the one that has the potential and is selling the most, and then you get bitter people emailing you
Yeah.
and asking, it's been 2 years since the last installment in that one series.
Yeah, that's what I've tried to avoid by doing the alternating approach. But again, the alternating approach leads to overall decreased momentum. Like you can't really pile on because you're going to spend the next 7 months writing, editing, and releasing a book that's not related to the one you just put out.
Right. It's definitely one of the kind of tricks now that's working really well is people, if they can, write pretty quickly and publish like 4 or 5 novels in a year in one series, it does really seem to work to get the momentum going. And yeah, I feel you with when you're doing like one book a year in a series, it seems like it's a lot harder. I mean, you can always get a BookBub ad or something, maybe, if you're lucky, for that book one and revive or bring to life a series that hasn't been doing so well. But it does seem like if you focus on one, at least to maybe do like 4 or 5 books or however many you're going to do, that maybe that's kind of the way to go now.
I definitely feel like rapid releases we've spoken on some other things about serials, and serials is a way to do it, I suppose, but people I find probably prefer a full-length novel. But yeah, rapid releases really sort of feel a lot more fulfilling to the fans, as long as the rapid releases are the thing they care about. Like, I suppose if I was doing a pen name for each individual series, the fans couldn't feel neglected because I was writing a different thing, because they wouldn't know I was writing a different thing. They'd think I was just really slow. But there can be sort of rivalries within your fan base if there's a lot of crossover, that is. If you sort of start paying too much attention to one and not the other.
Yep, definitely. I hear you on that one. But at the same time, I think if you have a couple series, not, it's probably better to do one to a stopping point and then start other ones. I say do as I say, not as I do. But you never quite know which series is going to be the one. Like
Yeah.
your first series has actually done quite well. With a lot of authors, it might be like the third series that kind of takes off and gains some traction. So I think it's worth exploring other series and not just sticking to the same one.
Yeah, it's definitely worth exploring on the series, and if not only because you're essentially, buying another lottery ticket, so to speak, because the first book is really the best chance you're going to have. I mean, I should say, a new thing that people can start reading is the best chance you're going to have to having a new level of success. But also, if you were writing in two different genres, or at least with two different plot lines, you can sort of recharge on one by focusing on the other for a while. So, well, I just can't think about fantasy anymore, but let me do sci-fi for a couple of months, and then by the time you're burnt out on sci-fi, you're fresh on fantasy again. So it can sort of increase your overall output.
Definitely. And I have to ask you, you're doing a fourth book now in your Book of Deacon series.
Yes.
It started as a trilogy. Did you intend for it to be only three books and then over?
I sort of didn't expect to be writing anymore. There was, yeah, I expected the trilogy was going to be a thing, and then when I realized no one was reading it, I wrote that one shorter follow-on just to see if that was worthwhile. But broadly speaking, I didn't expect to be writing any more for these characters. I thought if I was going to write any more in this setting, it would be distant, and I would sort of start a new thing. But like people really like these characters, and they specifically want to read more about their adventures. And the way the trilogy ends, it ends again a sort of a narrative thread, but it does not end the potential problems within the setting. So start going forward from here with this being technically the fourth book, even though it's about the sixth book that I've written in the setting. It's the fourth one if you start from the trilogy. I'll probably sort of leave it semi-open-ended from this point forward until I hit no one wants to read anymore. Let me do a finale. But yeah, it was going to just be a trilogy, but there's enough setting to continue it on if that's what people want and if I want to do it.
All right. Yeah, it's probably a good idea to maybe have a certain number of books planned, and then it feels complete after that, so you're not leaving people hanging. But if you end with like killing your main character or something, then if that series does one day become successful, then
Yeah.
you're kind of out of luck.
It's kind of hacky to justify a sudden resurrection because the character got popular again. So yeah, I agree. It's very handy to have sort of a set number of books in mind so that you can write a fulfilling storyline as opposed to one that drags on for 25 years and people never get to the end of. But yeah, leaving room or at least an idea of how things can move on in a fulfilling way after that, if you want, not a bad idea in case things catch on.
All right, and I know you've got the fourth one up for pre-order. It comes out in November.
Yep.
Have you found that, I guess it's probably been like 3 years since you wrote the original trilogy, at least. Is that right?
Well, I mean, since I published in 2010, so it was
5 years?
finished shortly before that, 5 years. Yeah.
Okay. Are you finding that your fans are just finding it right away and are excited and are buying it, or is it like, have people forgotten and like what's it? It's kind of hard to tell with pre-orders, but any
It's a little
early
bit
thoughts?
tricky. I think people are following on pretty well. I've been fairly active with my fans, and I try to engage them a lot. And I've been pushing the first book of the trilogy as my primary funnel to all of my other stuff this entire time. So there's constantly a new batch of fans to the series that are sort of just hitting the end as this is about to come out. So the fans like the longtime fans who have stayed with the series and have looked at all the little mini, like the prequel and the short stories, and I'll do pre-order perks that are in that setting. Those people are excited because they're finally going to learn more about the characters they liked most. And the people who are fresh to the series are just getting it. Like as far as they're concerned, it wasn't a trilogy. It was a 4-part series and perhaps an open-ended 5-part, 6-part, 7-part series. So overall, it seems like this has not been forgotten, and that makes me happy. I'll put it this way: this is the first book that has paid for itself in its entirety, as to say, the cover and the editing, in pre-order. Nothing else has paid for itself in pre-order before. So there's a little bit of juice to this one yet, it seems.
All right, excellent. And how long are with pre-orders? You've been doing them for a couple books. Have you learned any tricks for that, or any do's and don'ts that you would warn folks about?
Well, there's the debate about whether or not it's worth doing pre-orders on Amazon, and I sort of don't have an answer to that. I pre-order everywhere just because, again, I value consistency in all things. So I don't want people. Most people I find, let's put it this way, I sort of do it both ways because you can pre-order for 6 months on other places and only 3 months on Amazon. So when I put the thing up for pre-order 6 months before release, the first questions I get are, when's it going to be available for pre-order on Amazon? So while you don't get the rank boost that you get on Apple because they don't apply the sales on day one, they apply the sales contiguously as you get them on Amazon, you can still get people to buy the book before the book is out. Like that's the essence of pre-order. So what I've learned is, even though there's not a real huge like silver bullet that you get from pre-orders on Amazon, I still do them and they're still worthwhile, and I still have more pre-orders on Amazon than any place else by a wide margin. So I guess do pre-order if you give people that target. And the other thing I've realized with pre-orders is, obviously you're not going to hammer the pre-orders for the entire 6 month period because your fans will hate you if you keep on saying, oh, by the way, in 6 months, in 5 months, in 4 months, in 3 months, and just keep on pushing it. But what you can do is, when valid information regarding the series comes out, you can also you can always push that. That'll be the second thing in your newsletter that week and that month. Whenever you put your newsletter out, and then push it a little bit harder and harder as time goes on. So it's sort of a slow burn in the background for a while, and then a heavy push later on, right before release. So that's another thing. And as far as in terms of don'ts, again, don't push it too hard. But I can't say that I've really run into anything in pre-orders that's too bad, except maybe pushing it too hard early on. Like if you do a big promotional push for your stuff when there's 4 months before it comes out, people are going to forget about it before it comes out. So if you've only got so much time and energy to put into promotion, closer to release is better than early on.
All right. Yeah, I've only recently become interested in the pre-orders myself. I've done it with the last couple of my Dragon Blood books, and it seems like a good thing to do for our later books in a series where you're not really, big deal if it gets a big sales ranking on day one, because nobody's going to pick up like book 6 in a series anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe they'll go look and see that you have a perma-free, but why not get those sales ahead of time? And I've found with my stuff that I get more pre-orders than I have people on my mailing list, even though my mailing list has a lot of self-publishing stuff on it. So there's a lot of people that, as much as you push your mailing list and all that stuff and social media, they won't necessarily sign up for that thing because if they're like me, they don't want to be on any author's mailing list.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
But the more months it's there on Amazon, the more they have the time to chance across it, and plus it can be a hot new release there for like up to, I guess you get to 3 months in pre-order, and then up to 30 days after the release that you can appear over in that sidebar if you're in a category where it's not too competitive.
Yeah. I'd say as much as people talk about the rank boost that you get for iBooks or whatever for pre-orders, I really think the most valuable part of pre-orders is that you have a thing that somebody can click, yes, I want this, for a long period of time. Instead of just trying to capture people in the first week, you can capture people in the first months. And while you probably don't have as much of a concentrated sales day as you might have if you didn't do a pre-order, you probably will have a larger overall number of sales because there were just more opportunities for essentially an impulse purchase.
Right, and I think we talked about this in the other show a little bit. It's possible when you get, popular and you've got a series that's selling well, that you could actually make like a USA Today bestseller list, because all those pre-orders count on release week.
That's right.
If you can also you have to get like 500 sales on one of the other stores like iTunes or Barnes & Noble, so that can be a sticking point for those of us who sell well on Amazon mostly.
Yeah, it's true.
Something to keep in mind. I was curious what your thoughts are on pricing too. It looks like you've got kind of most of your books around $2.99 in your fantasy series and your steampunk, and the new one is going to be $4.99. Was there what was the thought there, or just
well,
charge more?
basically, there's a few thoughts I had behind it. The first one was my books are pretty darn long. I average around 150,000 words, And at 150,000 words, I've got people selling their NaNoWriMo novels for $2.99. So it kind of struck me I could probably justify a higher price than I had previously. And but the other thing about it is when you like, I wanted to charge $2.99 because I wanted the absolute highest value and therefore lowest cost possible for the reader. But you have a lot of potential pitfalls with $2.99 because literally, if someone discounts and you price match by 1 penny, it cuts your sales in half, your earnings in half. So I also kind of wanted to raise my price for future books in order to just broadly speaking, give myself a little more headroom and leeway in the event there's a pricing snafu. So a little bit because I realize I might have been lowballing myself, but a lot I just wanted a lot more flexibility and recovery in the event of mishap.
Yeah, considering you write pretty long novels, I think $5 is quite fair. That's what I put most of mine at that are like over 100,000 words. But I did start. It's kind of weird when you start with one series, you start at one price. It's pretty low. I feel a little uncomfortable about like stair stepping the price up. So
yeah, it was at great length considered before I actually started doing it.
I think with mine, I decided whenever I'm going to raise the price, I'll just raise the price across the board. Like this series is done, and I'll leave like the perma-free or something, book one, and like, all right, I'm working on other stuff. If you want to buy this, it's $5 a book.
Yeah. It's not a bad idea, but I sort of have a little concern. I shouldn't. It's more important, I feel, to give the best deal to your core fans. But I also kind of feel like it's a bait and switch if I get a thing really popular and then raise the price. So I try not to increase the price of a book once it's been released. And whereas I might decrease the price if it's old enough, or if it's sort of now got enough of a series that it could be a lead-in as opposed to just a book that I might make some money off of.
Right. I'll probably raise the price once the series is over and I'm just not really marketing as much anymore and don't have new releases coming out. I kind of feel like if you're still selling really well, the lower price can definitely help you. But if things have tapered off, you've fallen off the top hundreds and that kind of thing, then like, oh, might as well get as much as you can for a book. And do you have any thoughts on like, the big five guys have been really doing expensive books this last year since they won their case, I guess. Any thoughts on that making our prices look even better?
I like when they charge a ridiculous amount because then it makes a reasonable amount seem even more reasonable. I really think it's very stupid to price an ebook anywhere close to what a paperback costs, let alone what a hardcover costs, because by now people realize there's just not a whole lot. There's not a. It costs 80 cents to deliver a book. Well, heck, it costs 8 cents to deliver a book, over bandwidth and stuff like that. So asking for $16 for that book is absurd. So I think it's, I like when they make my prices look better because I can live quite comfortably on the prices I'm charging. I don't need to charge more. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's foolish of them to sort of price gouge on ebooks. But I don't mind if it helps me out.
Yeah, I think the theories I've heard is that they're just trying to preserve print sales and that whole system that they've got going on to make that more attractive to order the hardback. Or
it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me though, because it's like we're not selling a whole lot of record players right now because records are a collector's item and only for people who are enthusiasts. But music industry is still making money because they've moved on to new mediums and stuff like that. It doesn't cost $12 to buy an MP3. It only costs $1 to buy an MP3. So I don't know. It's like I don't know why you need to shore up the old system if the old system is declining. Why don't we focus on giving people what they want as opposed to making people want what we'll give them?
Well said. And I will let them continue to be screwy while I'm trying to sell my books here. I'll just enjoy it for as long as I can.
Yep.
All right. One question I actually talked to you about asking that I think we forgot to hit on earlier was just your thought on cliffhangers insofar as like keeping people into the series, getting them to buy the next book. Did you do it in your first trilogy? Are you doing it now?
I did do it on my first trilogy. I will say a cliffhanger, if you write a good enough, an interesting enough book, and you write a cliffhanger in a good enough way, you are going to make more sales. People are going to, perhaps begrudgingly, buy through because they want to hear the rest of the story, and you got them at a very sensitive point where they're invested in the characters. But you have to get them invested in the characters, so it's not a sure thing just to get more sales with a cliffhanger. That said, I'm not a huge fan of cliffhangers. I as a reader hate them, particularly if there's a long lag between other releases. But so what I would prefer, let's put it this way. Yes, it's a very good idea to leave the reader invested in knowing what will happen in the next book, but I've been leaning away from vicious cliffhangers and leaning toward what we'll call sequel hooks, where you get a little taste of the direction the next book might go, but you don't necessarily, you're not at the edge of your seat the entire time, getting angrier and angrier at the author for leaving you hanging, because it really does feel like you're being manipulated with a cliffhanger. So it absolutely helps if you write it well enough, but I'm leaning away from them just because I want to be nicer to my audience.
All right. Well, I think I kind of am the same way. I like the little teaser at the end, like, because I've been mad in the past, and maybe it's more in fantasy where you see this, where it's like, it was a trilogy. It's designed as one story, so we are just going to, cut it off at a very vital, important point and not have it feel like a complete novel.
That's exactly how again, I wrote the first trilogy as one giant long book, so it does just sort of end off midstream at the end of the first book because it was only the first third of a larger book. So yeah, it's again, it worked well, and literally this morning I got an email from someone saying that I ended the first book in a really cruel place. So I don't like getting emails like that. Even if it's going to help me make more money, I'd rather have happier customers than people with torches and pitchforks waiting for the next release.
Well, at least if, as indie authors, we can release fairly quickly. So if that is your strategy, yeah. You're not leaving people hanging for 3 years.
Don't leave them because you'll get angry people. The longer you make them wait, the angrier they're going to be, and you don't want people leaving bad reviews just because of how long they had to wait to get that book.
I still look back now when I watch like the original Star Wars, and I'm like, I cannot believe these people had to wait 3 years from the end of The Empire Strikes Back to see what happens next.
Yeah, it's rough. That's the worst too, because the first Star Wars movie is reasonably standalone, but the second one is the first half of a movie.
Right. All right. Well, those are most of my questions here, so I'll pass it back to Adam. I think we had a viewer question that he might ask you.
Ooh, neato.
Yep, we did. So, yeah, we're getting pretty close to the hour anyway, so we'll probably wrap it up soon after this. But, yeah, I like the idea of at the end of the book, the snippet of the sequel. Though it kind of reminds me of the whole after the credits in movies thing that's been trendy for the last 5 or 10 years now.
Yeah, very much that way. The stinger, I think they call it.
Yep, exactly. And it seems like every movie now has to have that. So it's a scam to get people to watch the credits, is what it is.
Well, sure.
All right, so the question is, let's see, it's a question on YouTube. So first off, thanks for watching live and leaving a question. So it's, how viable might it be to write outside of chronological order within a particular story universe? Is having the entire core completed and published necessary prior to introducing standalone side art, sharing some characters? So I think what they're getting at is while they're in the process of writing a series or maybe a long series, do you think it's fine for them to go ahead and explore spin-off novels, side novels, prequels, things like that, or should they really stick to that? Is it super important to stick to that first set of story, I think?
I think, and technically speaking, even though it was close enough that didn't really make a difference, technically I did do a side story or sort of a spin-off before I finished the trilogy, because the second book I published was the novella that takes place long afterward. But my opinion on it is what I did, I think, is the way it ought to be done. The first 3 books were done, and they sort of had a release sequence in mind. If you're going to do spin-off type things, I think it's important that the audience know that that's not taking time away from continuing the thread they care about. Like, this is coming out while we're waiting for the next release, not instead of me writing the next release. So if as long as you plan it out correctly, I think it's definitely valid to start spin-offs before it's finished. But in those cases, it is extra important that you don't step on the toes of the forthcoming novels and spoil plot points in them. So, whereas if you're done and then you go back and fill in blanks, you should care less about spoilers. If people are invested in a primary series and you start giving them flat-out spoilers in the spin-offs, I think you're going to have a lot of angry fans on your hands. So it should definitely at least feel like part of a larger plan, and ideally it would be part of a larger plan for the spin-offs versus the main thread.
You probably have a better chance too if you've written the series first to have more people that have joined in throughout it. By the time you get that finished, that'll probably go on and buy those side stories anyway. Like,
yeah,
you're gonna have more success with those if you have a bigger fan base that may have read the entire series, and instead of looking for the next book in the series, they just are looking for, like you said, some of that stuff to fill in holes or gaps or things, or maybe some more information about their favorite people. So,
yeah, I would say it's my observation has been people, regardless of the release order, people want to read the main story first before they learn other things. So it could be useful to have those other things ready for them when they're done reading the main story, but you're probably not going to see a lot of motion on those other things until the main story is done. So again, releasing them alongside is okay as long as it's clear that that's part of a plan. But yeah, I think the most reasonable release is the main thread first with the spin-offs coming after.
Yeah, I agree for sure. So, right, that's the only question we had that came in tonight. But for anyone that's watching live that get a chance to maybe came in late, or even if you're listening to this on iTunes weeks or months later, you can always leave a question after the fact. And I mean, Lindsay's on another podcast with Joe, so I'm sure she can pass the question or point him to the the YouTube page or whatever it was that it was left on. So if you guys have any questions for Joe or myself or Lindsay, you can feel free to leave them on the YouTube page or on the site. The episode page for this one, of course, thewritingpodcast.com/22 for that. All right. And Lindsay, I know you said you got to most of your questions. Was there any other burning questions that you wanted to ask or needed to ask before we wrap things up?
Oh, I don't know. I was just going to ask him how he's doing on Google Play, because we were talking about at one point you were going to run a sale or something on Google Play, something I didn't even know you could do. So I was just curious how things were going.
Google Play is doing really remarkably well, consistently well. Like whereas the rest of my stuff sort of started to decline into the summer months, as it tends to for me. Google Play has been consistently, again, it's sort of been like running for second place with Amazon and with Apple and Barnes and Noble, which are my other two big earners. So we're talking, hundreds of dollars a month. And that's good news. But there's a couple of things Google Play does that I think have been really handy. One of them is, I forget the exact term they use, but it's something along the lines of certified quality assurance or something like that. You can put in someone's email and give them an early version give them a pre-release copy of the book. It will automatically insert it into their Google Books, Playbooks library, so that they can read it before release and let you know if is the format good or are there typos or anything like that. So it's a way to deliver books to beta readers through the actual device they read it on, which is kind of handy. And the other thing is you can set up promos like in Google Play. So instead of going in and changing the price for the month that you want the price to be different, you can set up a little spreadsheet and say, starting on this date, I want this price to drop to this price and stay that way for 2 weeks and then go back up. So the entire promotion is handled automatically without your hands, with no price matching necessary. I've used that at least once, and it worked like clockwork as long as you format the spreadsheet correctly. So that's a handy tool as well.
Yeah, I like that. I've tried that on Kobo's doing that now, and of course Amazon does it if you're in KDB Select. They let you schedule promotions, but otherwise you have to remember to go in and change everything. Did you find that, did you get any extra sales from that, or were you just happen to do that while you had a BookBub going or something like that?
It was part of a larger promotion, and I definitely had more sales as a result of it, but not specifically on Google Play. It was more of I had generally higher sales overall because of the larger promotion. So I haven't done a Google Play specific, just only on Google Play promo. but we'll see. But definitely dropping the price helped a bit over there, as it does everywhere. I also tend to have much higher prices on Google Play because they still discount books, and my aforementioned issue where I can't afford to lose even a penny on Amazon without losing lots of money, so I have to put some headroom in Google Play.
Yeah, I think it was actually back in show 2 of the writing podcast here that Adam posted the big chart. Like, if you want the price to be $4.95, make it $6, whatever it was. So
I should say this. This is I've observed this with Google Play. Again, I price it often twice as much on Google Play, and I've observed that Google Play is now price matching down to the Amazon price. But because this is a wholesale place, not an agency place, they're paying me the royalty on the full price. So this is a situation where whatever the book is listed for $5.99, it's selling for $2.99, but I'm getting the royalty on $5.99, which I think is why I'm making an unusually large amount of money on Google Play compared to the others proportionately, just because I'm getting a bigger slice of the pie than I ought to be. So I'm not going to depend too heavily upon it.
that's interesting. I didn't know that they did that.
I didn't know they did it either. In fact, they didn't tell me they were doing it. I just realized when I was getting links for a BookBub promo, I was like, wait, that's the same price. It has the other price crossed out and the price match price listed in. So, yeah, it was a surprise to me as well.
Yeah, they don't tell me anything. I don't think I've ever gotten an email from somebody at Google to talk about books.
The only time I ever got an email from Google about books was when they realized I didn't have my payment profile filled in for every region. I only had it for the main money income regions. So they told me, oh, if you just put world in this one area, you'll be for sale in 15 other storefronts. I was like, oh, well, that's a good idea, Google. Good catch.
All right, cool. Well, that's about all I've got for questions. Adam, is that it for the show, or are you wrapping us up?
Yeah, I think that's it. I just refreshed everything. Everything doesn't look like we have any new questions this week. So definitely have viewers though. It shows we have 14 live, so they're just quiet viewers this time. So, but that's fine too. We appreciate you watching live. So, and for anyone, we were talking before the show also. I'm not sure if it's lifted yet or if either of you know. But there for a while, at least, Google Play was restricting new publishers signing up for Google Play books. So if you hadn't been on Google Play with your books before, you weren't able to upload. Do you guys know if that's still in effect or not sure?
I do not know.
I have not heard anything to say it's been lifted. I know not that long ago somebody posted on Kboards, and it was like, are they ever going to open up again? So I don't know. It was something to do with piracy, I think, and
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah, for sure. So for anyone that isn't on Google Play yet, you can check it out and see if they've lifted that yet. And if they have, I would say get on there. And Lindsay mentioned it, the podcast where I explained how to get on there. All that stuff still stands. They haven't changed it since then, and it's writingpodcast.com/7. And it's stayed pretty consistent what you fill out and do.
It's 2.
It's 2?
I go to it often to get the Google links.
But I have getting your books on a Google Play Store tutorial, TWP number 7.
No, but go to episode 2. There's on the blog, you've got the chart.
Oh, you're talking about the chart. Yeah. Okay, so 2 is the chart. 7 is the tutorial on how to get your books on there, like what you need to put in. And what brought that up is you were talking about putting world to make sure it goes everywhere. Yeah. So that one is a big tip. Also, if you're watching and you're on Google Play, make sure that you have as many currencies as you can in the currency section. You actually have to put, if you put like a USD price, anywhere in the world can buy it with the American dollar for that price. But if they don't use that currency, they're not going to be able to buy your book. So go in there and put as many currencies as you can, and that'll help you sell in all these countries. Because I think Google Play is in something like 50, 55 countries or something crazy like that. So it's worth the time, I think, to go in there and just set all the currencies as well and make sure you have world selected for your publishing rights and stuff.
Yeah, I've observed in the earnings things that only about half of my money comes from U.S. Well, I should say only half of my money is in U.S. dollars. The rest of it comes from big in Australia. There's a lot British pounds. So yeah, I agree with that 100%.
All right, so we are just a couple minutes past the hour mark, so we will wrap it up for this week. Joe, thanks for coming on the show again. And did you have anything else left that we maybe didn't touch on, or in the last minute, do you want to at least tell people where to go buy all this stuff so they can see how you really did it?
Well, yeah. I mean, as Lindsay said, I have a new book coming out next week. Basically, it'll be out on everywhere on the 10th of November. So if you go to bookofdeacon.com, you can find I'll be doing posts about the release and whatnot. But that's mostly where you'll find me, or just search for Joseph Lallo or Joseph R. Lallo. Either one works. On your ebook platform of choice.
All right, and for anyone that didn't get that or want to go see where the links are, just click them. Go to thewritingpodcast.com/22. By the time this is up on iTunes, you guys are listening to this, I'll have the links to all of that in there too. So, all right. So once again, thanks for coming on the show. Lindsay and I will be back next Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern again. And I noticed last week when I had mentioned if anyone wanted to, post questions or things like that, I actually got a couple people saying that they didn't know where to do it or they weren't sure if this was the right place to do it. So anywhere that we are, we'll see them. But the ones that go through the fastest, you can mail us at mel@thewritingpodcast.com or on Twitter at @writingpodcast. So no the. So if you have any questions, either one of those will come through. And like I said, it doesn't have to be live. We'll answer them regardless. So, but anyway, that's it for this week. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.